On September 4th, 1926, bidding for contract airmail Route 9 from Chicago to Minneapolis is opened. Only one carrier bids on the route, a new startup airline called Northwest Airways. Welcome back to A Brief History, a series where I take a quick look into some of the most influential aircraft and airlines in aviation history. Today, we're taking a look at one of America's original airlines, Northwest Airlines. Founded by Colonel Lewis Britton and based in Minneapolis, Northwest Airlines initially began operations with a fleet of two rented aircraft, a Thomas Moore Scout and a Curtiss Oriole. Later that year, Northwest introduced the nation's first closed-cabin commercial airliner, the Stinson Detroiter, and on July 5, 1927, St. Paul businessman Byron Webster became Northwest's first ticketed passenger. He paid $40 for a 12-and-a-half-hour one-way flight from the Twin Cities to Chicago via La Crosse, Madison, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Charlie Speed Holman, Northwest's first pilot, was at the controls. In 1927, Northwest carried a whopping 106 passengers, making it one of the nation's largest airlines of the time. By the end of 1928, Northwest had a fleet of 20 passenger aircraft, including 6-passenger single-engine Hamilton metal planes and 14-passenger Ford Trimotors. At this point, Northwest was regularly carrying mail and passengers throughout the American Midwest. They had expanded their route network to include destinations like Green Bay, Fond du Lac, Oshkosh, and Appleton, just in Wisconsin alone. During this time, they were also catching the eye of some businessmen, and on August 1, 1929, a Minnesota-led group by Richard C. Lilly completed the first acquisition of the company in its short history. In the 1930s, Northwest Airways continued its rapid expanding until the Great Depression threw a wrench in the plans of many. At this time, the demand for air mail transport and passenger transport quickly diminished, with President Roosevelt canceling all air mail contracts shortly thereafter. In 1934, Northwest Airways was reincorporated as Northwest Airlines, and Lewis Britton, founder of the airline, resigned from his post as president of the company. Late in 1939, Northwest made the leap into modern passenger aviation and put their first Douglas DC-3 into passenger service. Their DC-3s were designed to carry 21 passengers at a speed of 140 miles an hour, unprecedented for the time. In the early 1940s, as the Second World War began brewing, the U.S. government commandeered nearly half of Northwest's fleet. They were also the main war cargo transport airline at the time, sending over 1 million pounds of cargo through their Minneapolis hub in just the first 6 months of the war. Also during wartime, Northwest had to cut services due to their diminishing fleet, but continued to expand via essential air service routes in Alaska and throughout the Pacific Northwest. Also during this time, the company's employment numbers skyrocketed from just south of 900 to over 10,000 by 1945. Also in 1945, Northwest became the fourth transcontinental airline in the United States. The airline began service to New York via Milwaukee and Detroit, completing the coast-to-coast expansion of their Northwest Passage. At this time, Northwest began flying the Douglas DC-4 and the Boeing 247D, once again increasing capacity and range in their fleet. After the war, another major milestone came about in 1947 when the Northwest Orient name was launched. The brand aimed to advertise their flights to Asian destinations, including Tokyo, Seoul, Shanghai, and Manila from Minneapolis via Anchorage and the Aleutian Islands. In 1949, Northwest took delivery of their first Boeing Stratocruiser, which offered significant upgrades in passenger comfort and even featured a double-decker cabin. 1950 was a tumultuous year for Northwest. On March 7th, a Northwest Airlines Martin 202 crashed into a house, killing 15 people. On June 23rd, a Northwest DC-4 is lost over Lake Michigan. The remains have never been found, and it's still the longest unsolved aviation accident in United States aviation history. On October 13th, November 7th, and January 16th of 1951 also marked Northwest accidents. All three aircraft involved were the Martin 202, resulting in a total of 37 fatalities. 1959 marked Northwest's introduction to the jet age with Lockheed Electra flights. July 8th marked Northwest's first pure jet service with the Douglas DC-8. It was also at this time Northwest marketed the fastest U.S. jet service to Asia slogan. The 60s saw insane growth for Northwest Airlines. By this time, the 720, 707, and 727 had been an integral part of their fleet as air travel became more accessible to everyday Americans. Also at this time, Northwest's main hub of Minneapolis was moved to present-day Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. This time period also saw the relocation of the Detroit hub from Willow Run Airport to Detroit Metropolitan Airport. By 1970, Northwest led the U.S. aviation industry in net profitability and continued expanding. This time period saw introduction of wide-body jetliners such as the DC-10 and Boeing 747. These aircraft continued to make Northwest a popular choice for business and leisure travelers as their multi-class cabins on these planes were newer and more comfortable. In 1978, the Airline Deregulation Act paved the way for further expansion. The airline continued being aggressive in its pursuit of transpacific routes, serving numerous destinations in Asia from their Minneapolis and Detroit hubs. They also strengthened their network in the southern United States and expanded transatlantic routes to the UK, Ireland, Germany, and Scandinavia. Also in this era, flights to China resumed after a 34-year hiatus due to the Chinese Civil War. In 1986, Northwest merged with Republic Airways, making it one of the largest airline mergers of the time. The new airline had a 3-hub network with operations centered around Detroit, Minneapolis, and Memphis. This merger was very chaotic to start, and in the first several days after, Northwest's on-time percentage was only around 42%. After the merger, the word Orient was dropped from the branding, creating one strong, unified brand under the Northwest Airlines name. The same day the Republic merger was approved, Northwest became one of the first U.S. airlines to place an order for a new innovative jetliner, the Airbus A320. The original order was for 10 airplanes, with later options for 90, with deliveries beginning in 1989. Also in 1989, the bowling shoe livery, as it was nicknamed by employees, was debuted, and so did the 747-400. The 747 Classic series had been utilized in various ways up to this point by the airline, and Northwest was the last airline to fly the Classic series of the 747. The Dash 400 variant offered the most capacity and range of any other aircraft, and Northwest used it throughout their entire route network. Northwest was bought out by a group of investors in 1989 as well. The buyout was so expensive that Northwest actually threatened bankruptcy and was only able to get by cutting wages of employees and a strategic alliance with KLM. The partnership with KLM became known as the Wings Alliance, but never really materialized to the point that both airlines wanted it to. With that being said, Northwest gradually pulled out of the European market and continued to focus mainly on their U.S. domestic, trans-Pacific, and inter-Asia routes. In the late 90s, Northwest was enjoying sufficient growth and expansion. Therefore, the airline decided to focus on technological advances. They invested a ton of time and money into quality of life improvement for passengers, including self-service check-in kiosks in 1997. They weren't the only U.S. airline to offer these kiosks, but they had the most by far. They were also the biggest U.S. airline to offer online check-in at this time, and had a reputation for refusing to raise ticket prices due to the ongoing oil crisis. To say that Northwest was a beloved part of the United States aviation industry was an understatement. Their service was on par with the likes of many big U.S. carriers, including Delta, United, and American, but their fares in some cases were significantly cheaper. However, in 2001, following the September 11th attacks, Northwest faced mounting pressure to change their business model. Employee layoffs were only a small portion of what the airline had to do to remain profitable. They accelerated the retirement of older aircraft, including the Boeing 727 and partially the DC-10 and DC-9 fleets. They withdrew more than 50 747, 757s, and A320s during this time as well. Remaining competitive with airlines such as Southwest, JetBlue, and AirTran was also a struggle. On September 14, 2005, Northwest Airlines filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Shortly before Northwest filed, Delta, United, and U.S. Airways also filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, making Northwest the fourth major U.S. airline to do so. Following its filing, Northwest renegotiated its labor contracts, lowering its highest level of flight attendant pay from $44,000 to $35,000. Northwest stock resumed trading on a when-issued basis on May 21, 2007, and regular trading began on May 31, 2007. Northwest Airlines was cleared by a federal bankruptcy judge to emerge from Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on May 31, 2007, ending Northwest's 20 months of difficulty trying to slash costs. On April 14, 2008, Northwest Airlines announced that it would be merging with Delta Airlines to form the world's largest airline. The merger was approved on October 29, 2008. At the time, Delta's CEO was Richard Anderson, who was a former Northwest CEO. It was determined that the combined airline would use Delta's name and branding. On October 1, 2009, Northwest WorldPerks merged with Delta SkyMiles, Delta's loyalty point system. On January 30, 2010, Delta completed the merge of the reservation systems and discontinued using the Northwest name for flights. The official final flight was Northwest Airlines Flight 2470 from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. As always, don't forget to subscribe for more content and make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Comment down below your favorite memories of Northwest Airlines and any suggestions for an airline or airplane you'd like to see me cover next. Thanks for watching this episode of A Brief History, and I'll see you next week.